Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's virtual roundtable titled COVID-19 Threatens Pharma's Global Supply Chain, What Next? Presented by Fierce Healthcare and Fierce Pharma. My name is Kyle Blankenship. I'm an associate editor at Fierce Pharma and Fierce Pharma Manufacturing, and I'll be this afternoon's moderator. Our speakers today are Damian Hawley. He's the head of supply chain at Novartis Pharmaceuticals, Chris Chen, who's the CEO of WuXi Biologics, and Leon Wiskowski, the president of commercial operations at Thermo Fisher Scientific. If you'd like to learn more about our speakers, you can read their information on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Just a few technical notes before we begin. The session is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Time permitting, we will follow the discussion period with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen. Without further ado, let's jump into our discussion. Gentlemen, as the title of the panel suggests, we will be discussing this afternoon the impact the global COVID-19 response has had on the pharmaceutical supply chain and next steps. Damian, I'd like to begin with you. Can you give the audience some background on your work at Novartis and how you've seen the COVID-19 response pose a challenge to supply in the last few months?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll just point out there may be a bit of a delay before you receive me because I'm on the other side of the ocean, sitting in Paris. So I actually work in the Sandoz division of Novartis. Sandoz, as you probably know, are a global leader in generic, high quality, affordable medicine. So our role really is to pioneer access to medicine. It's absolutely critical that we do that for our patients. We have about 1,000 molecules in our portfolio. We have over 500 million patients that we serve every single year. And Sandoz is clearly the largest generics supplier into the EU market. My personal role, I'm the supply chain head. I'm based here in Paris in France, as I said. And really the role is to facilitate delivery to patients. And we do that through a network of manufacturing sites and clearly a whole distribution network to make that function as well. And if I was to summarize what it is that I do, it's really directing the supply chain, inventory management, forecasting, distribution, and then at the back end, logistics. So I think it depends, what kind of organization you are and where you're based. But actually, we started to work in this COVID crisis back in January of this year. So we actually realized what was going on in China extremely early. I think everybody would have liked to have known sooner, but we were on it straight away, right from the moment that we got any news that there was a new virus coming through China. So we actually implemented our pre-written business continuity plan at that point. And of course, it's very important to say, when you get to that point, it's not the time to decide what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. It has to be pre-written, it has to be pre-designed, and you need to be ready to let it go. And actually, we even had a scenario in our business continuity plan for a pandemic, so it was perfect. And as an industry, people often forget, but we've been through things like this before. So if we look back not too long ago, some people may remember that we had a very large ash cloud, which came across all of Europe and some parts of even North Africa, and it took all of the planes out of the air. And if I remember correctly, that was for almost for 3 weeks. So we have actually been in this kind of situation before, where we've not been able to move things around. But actually, with our business continuity plan, we actually find a way to keep things functioning, and we're still finding ways to make that happen. The plans are very, very robust. We've actually got factories based in Italy, and specifically in northern Italy, which is the region which is most touched by the coronavirus, and it certainly has been over the last few weeks. We've also had an extremely high demand, as you might imagine, so that demand was not necessarily anticipated to happen precisely at that point, but we're actually continuing to deliver medication to our patients. The mitigation that we've got in place through our business continuity plan seems to be functioning. Our inventory levels have been correct, but challenges are emerging, daily. It's a very, very dynamic situation. And I think what I would say is it's beyond the control of any one individual company. So we really do need to work together as an industry to give a response for our patients. And transparency is also critical. If we are going to have issues, we need to be transparent with each other and also with the medical community and with our patients.
Thank you. Dr. Chen is the CEO of a Chinese CDMO with facilities around the globe. Can you give us an idea of WuXi's place in the supply chain and how you've seen the COVID-19 response play out for both your operations and throughout the industry?
Sure, great to be here. As you mentioned that we are a global CDMO. Right now, I mostly operate in China. We're building a facility in Ireland and in US. We were at the epicenter of the global coronavirus outbreak. And WuXi Biologics, we are a global CDMO. We enable companies to develop biologics. So we're currently working with about 250 molecules in biologics space in oncology, autoimmune disease, rare disease, and infectious disease. And because of that, so we support companies in Boston, San Francisco, London, Zurich, and so we really have a global network of clients. During the outbreak, we also immediately activated our business continuity plan, and I actually myself led a response team. Every day we work for about 2 hours. We have 2 hours meeting for the leadership team from EHS, procurement, supply chain, R&D, and administration, and HR, and we talk about how do we handle the daily situation. Initially is how do we make sure our employees are safe, and later is how do we make sure we have enough supplies for continue running the campaign, and eventually, and how do we communicate this to the clients and to partners, and also share our best practice. During the coronavirus outbreak in China, we actually have a 3 process validation campaign. It's incredible. So we managed to get this done, and one of them is already finished. The other 2 are still ongoing. So we also, I think, absolutely critical is the business continuity plan, and then a very prompt action from the leadership side. How do you tackle the situation? On top of that, right immediately after China's so the coronavirus outbreak become manageable, we actually we are working very hard on medicines and antibodies, neutralization antibodies, proteins to manage the symptoms of the COVID-19. So we have 8 programs ongoing right now to hopefully develop neutralization antibodies and therapeutics to to both either treat or prevent the disease. And because of that, our supply chain is also very, very critical. So essentially, right now we are actually we have more than 240 people working on COVID-19 programs alone, and so we bring raw materials globally from US, from Europe, and working on the cell line, working on the manufacturing process, and try to scale it up at the same time. So it is also quite hectic event. But overall, I think absolutely critical is the business continuity plan, and it need to be as the previous speaker said, you need to activate right away, and need to have a very very strong leadership team working on it, and hopefully this outbreak will be managed in the US and in Europe very well in the next couple weeks, hopefully not months.
And finally, Leon, you come to this topic from the clinical supply side. Can you give us an idea of the work that Thermo Fisher Scientific does in that arena and how you've seen their response evolve?
Sure. It's very similar to the other speakers. So just to tell you a little bit about Thermo Fisher Scientific, we are a global organization, about 75,000 colleagues around the world. Our mission is really centered around the customers as we enable them to make the world safer, cleaner, and healthier. Across the organization, right? So we're a life sciences organization, and we focus on a couple of different areas that are really specific and critical to this COVID battle. We have a group within the company that's a diagnostics group. They just created a diagnostic test for COVID, and they're now going through the process of manufacturing that test and globally. We are also very strong through our Fisher Scientific brand in terms of supplying PPE to the healthcare industry. And the group that I'm part of, the Pharma Services Group, It is a full service CDMO. So we go from drug substance, manufacturing and API, to drug product, as well as packaging and logistics. And as you mentioned, I have been and are part of that group, and I've been the head of their clinical trial division, which is focused on the clinical supply chain. But our BCP is really across the group. The group has 50 different operations globally, expanding from Asia, PAC, in Europe, as well as the United States. But we are across 5 different continents. I think what's interesting, was different, very challenging, because I remember when Damien Till was talking about the volcano, the ash. We went through that challenge. We've been through earthquakes in Japan. I think the challenge in this particular case is not, it's dissimilar in that it's global in its impact. We tend to focus on regional issues, regional impact, and this has been something that's been global in nature. Very robust business continuity planning. If you were to think about the 3 pillars that we utilize, one is we want to be able to keep our people safe. Very important. As you think about what we're working on, it's not just the 35 projects that we have today in our pipeline that are focused on either a therapy or a vaccine to combat this COVID crisis. We have other medicines that we work on across our network that are critical for human health. So we ask our employees to come into work every single day, and all of them are working in countries and cities that are impacted by this crisis. So our first priority is we got to keep our people safe. So we have protocols in our BCP around how we do that. We have to keep our plants open in order for them to be able to do the manufacturing and the packaging that's so critical for our customers and the patients that they serve. And then transportation is critical. I think that's one of the things I talk to a lot of our customers, and one of the things that we have seen is how the transportation lanes have been impacted so much. We tend to be able to do our manufacturing locally, but then we distribute our products globally. But not just the ability to bring products from one region to another, one state to another, but we are very much in the supply chain. When you think about the development supply chain, our distribution is direct to a site, and more the patients that we serve can't get to those sites. So we've had to work with our customers to ensure that we have different distribution models than what's been historical distribution models, in order to ensure that patients that cannot get to a clinical site to get medication can get medication from the site to their homes. And we've had to implement those processes across all the regions that we serve. So it's been a tremendous effort. I think if I were to look at a fourth part of our BCP is communication. We talked about that already. It's not just communication internally, but because we are a CDMO, it's critical to communicate externally to our customers. Our customers need to understand the status of our operations. They need to be accurate. There needs to be a single source of truth to ensure that they get the right information at the right time. As they're planning their supply chains, they know they can count on ours.
Now that the audience has an idea of where each of our panelists is coming from, I'd like to talk about next steps with the novel coronavirus pandemic likely to continue for at least the next few months. Chris, starting with you, can you give us an idea of what WuXi is doing over the course of the next few months to keep its end of the supply chain stable, and what steps your company and the industry on the whole should take over the next few months?
I think as I mentioned earlier, so we have a very good BCP. So even at the beginning of the outbreak, we already start to notice how serious the COVID-19 could be. So we start to plan all the materials and to build some inventory of the material. Also work with our vendors to ensure they have potentially multiple site, and to ensure that they have a supply. Prior to that, in as part of the BCP, we already identified, for every key raw material, we hopefully have multiple supplier. We have one, at least one in the US and one in Europe, and some maybe in Japan, in China, and make sure. So that's as part of the business risk mitigation. So we have done that already 3 years ago. Essentially, now we identified, for the whole supply chain, what are the risk area, and if the U.S. has some issue, how do we move some of the orders to Europe? And if Europe has issues, can we move it to Japan or China? And as part of the long-term planning, so we already have that in place. I think during the outbreak, then it's a matter of how do you communicate with your supplier to make sure that they have a steady supply. As the previous speaker mentioned, during the outbreak, shipping has been a challenge, but overall, we have been able to manage. We ship cell banks and products and samples all over the world during the past 2 months. As long as you notify the world courier or whatever company you work with, notify them early, and then you schedule flight early. I think it's still, even during the current outbreak, the shipping is still manageable. I think overall is planning your supply chain way ahead of before the crisis, and make sure you have a redundancy in the supply chain. I think that help us very, very well. As mentioned earlier, now we're working with multiple therapeutic programs. And that's a challenge because we don't even have a process yet, and we don't know what raw materials would be used to make the batches in the next couple of months. From the design perspective, now we want to use what we call a platform, the material we use frequently first, and that hopefully that will have some inventory, and then our vendors also have the inventory, and that will alleviate the situation a little bit better.
Leon, your thoughts on Thermo Fisher Scientific's game plan over the next few months?
Sure. I very similar to what Chris mentioned. I would add a few things, right? I mean, of course, there is the element of ensuring that your supplier base, so a tremendous effort across our procurement organization to ensure that your supplier base is robust, finding out where the weakest links are to ensure that they're secured. I think our biggest challenge right now so far has been more around the protective equipment that's required. I think in order to work in our operations. When you think about a GMP environment, where you're doing sterile fill finish, you're doing a lot of manufacturing and packaging of pharmaceutical products. Some of the same PPE that's being used in the battle for COVID by our healthcare providers is the same that we need to use in our organization. So it's the element of ensuring that we have the right amount for the right activities, but be very honest, very careful about overstocking, because we also want to make sure that we support our healthcare providers that are in the front line of this battle. So that's one of the areas where we feel has been the most challenge. Optionality is another word that we use in terms of the philosophy of ensuring. I'll give you an example: transportation. When we have a transportation service that we provide not just to our customers but to our own supply chain, where we have a set of individuals that I've been incredibly impressed with in terms of how they've been able to manage through the challenges that we've seen in the logistics space. And even when you hear about different, governments closing borders, issues with airports, these professionals have been able to ensure that we are able to get material that we need for our manufacturing operations in and out of the different countries that they're supplied from. I think when you see these types of issues, you realize how global our supply chains are, and how embedded we are across all these different municipalities and countries to support our supply chains, and to have this transportation capability has been really, really important. And then the other part, in terms, you talk about the duration. I think the other thing that's very important that we're thinking about and executing is think about the amount of individuals that are now working outside of these plants. And I'm just going to be focused on our pharma services group. We have project managers, supply chain demand managers that are used to working in the operations where the manufacturing takes place. So when you think about data, information that's required to have the right communication with the customers and to plan the supply chain processes, you're used to being in the plant. You can't be in the plant anymore. Part of how we protect our plants and we protect our people is to limit the amount of individuals that are in the plant. So the folks that can work from home have to work from home. So as you think about strategies of communication, this meeting, I can't tell you how many virtual meetings we're having now with customers and video But it's not just the customers; it's the internal capability for now our individuals, our professionals that are more on the project management side, to be able to leverage technology to stay connected to the plants, to stay connected to our customers, and to stay connected to themselves in a situation that we know is not going to last, a couple of weeks. Here in Pennsylvania, where I'm based, already the governor is saying we're going to have a shelter-in-place order for the entire state through April 30th. So that's another 4 weeks of being able to work in this new environment. So it's not just the physical supply chain, it's also how we ensure that the professionals that we depend on to manage the supply chain stay connected and are effective during this time.
And Damien, what do the next few months of supply look like for Novartis, and what steps is the company taking?
So I think, there are going to be lots of similarities with my two colleagues. Clearly, we implemented our business continuity plan back in January, as I said, and it's extremely durable. Parts of the business have actually been out of the office now for maybe 5 or 6 weeks. Personally, I've been out of the office for 3 weeks. So I guess what that tells us is that the plans we got are able to function even though we're not together in the office. And we've all found ways of making that work for the employees and for their families equally. I think the other thing that I would add to the circumstances, I think the key word in all of this is collaboration. And we need to think about cross-industry collaboration, and we also need to think about governmental collaboration. And I'll just give you, one example of where we've acted as an industry with government to make things happen. So governments were starting to lock down borders in certain places. We didn't have information on that in advance. And we had one particular issue that I'll focus on, which was in Poland. And the borders got closed, and there was no understanding of how medicine was going to flow across the border. And on the first day that happened, there was a tailback of 80 kilometers just of trucks lining up, waiting to get through. And in the midst of all of those trucks, there were, critical medical supplies needing to get through, and they couldn't get through. So we actually worked together as an industry to think how we might be able to mitigate that. And we went to the European Commission, and we worked with them on a process of how we were going to make this function. The process got rolled out across the region very, very quickly. And I'm really pleased to say that, the following day, the processes were clear. They were much reduced. And actually, we had a green lane, which allowed these critical medical supplies to flow directly across the border. So that's one element of the collaboration I think we can continue to work on as we go through this crisis. We're actually still able to deliver to our patients. We've got the mitigation in place, we've got the inventory level, but there are still challenges. And I think increasing the collaboration is only going to help us to meet those challenges. So moving ahead, I think industry collaboration, opening up the dialogue with governments. What we don't really need to happen is for changes to happen at last minute. So borders closing without us being aware that they're going to close and how we're actually going to operate during that. I think somebody else also mentioned export bans. So we've seen several companies and countries operating on export bans and trying to keep materials in a certain part of the globe, which, as we know, our supply chains are now global. So that doesn't really work for any of us. And other people thinking about producing only for the local market. So as we know, with these global supply chains, we have to be able to keep medicine flowing around the world, even right from the very early stages, from intermediates right till we get to finished packaged product getting out to the patient. And anything that can help to ease the pressure on a system which is set up as a global undertaking to deliver to patients is absolutely the right thing to do. So life-saving medicines need to move. Governments need to share their plans in advance and try to align with the industry before we actually get to the next circumstance that we haven't discussed or communicated in advance.
I'd like to focus directly on shortages for a moment. Obviously, this is an important question given the immense demand for drugs being evaluated to treat COVID-19. Leon, can you tell us what factors contribute to both spot and widespread shortages on your end of the supply chain, and tell us what the likelihood is in your eyes that shortages will increase in the coming months?
I think, look, if what we're talking about here, if our BCP plants hold, and there's no indication that they will not. You think about what Damien was just talking about. We have operations in China. We've had our BCP also enacted since January. We continue to collaborate as we are. And we continue to ensure that the collaboration that Damon talked about is so important, the government collaboration, in terms of being able to ensure that we have the ability to transport and continue to manage our global supply chain effectively. I can tell you, we're gonna, as an industry, as a pharmaceutical industry, I think all the professionals, not just here on this panel, but the ones that are listening, and all of us are working to get medicines, to the market, as well as medicines to clinical sites, and get COVID treatments and COVID vaccines as well developed. We are going to continue to work as an industry to ensure that when you think about shortages, I mean, I worry more not about shortages within our own supply chains, right? I believe that we have a very robust demand planning organization. When we think about spikes, the organization, there is a lot of, if we collaborate properly, when you think about internal capacities and CDMOs, there's an enormous amount of capacity that we can deploy to ensure that those issues or those concerns are mitigated, and we are doing that within our own supply chain, and working with our customers directly. Where do you see the demand spikes? We have seen a little bit of a demand spike. If you think about how doctors have prescribed maybe more medicines for longer periods of time for patients, just in case they need to stay at home, in the orders that we're seeing now. But we've been able to deal with that and those spikes. And I think part of that is the forward thinking around ensuring that the BCPs were robust enough that anticipated that these challenges would come. We have redundancies within our own organizations. Most of our customers have multiple plants that are approved to ensure that they can leverage the capacity across the entire network. I think that the more that we continue to think about a network and a partnership between our innovators as well as the CDMO industry, we'll be able to mitigate any shortages. And I look at it just from even my perspective and just the micro world of a site, where if you think about a patient that no longer can go to a site and get medicine, we've been able to even mitigate that microcosm of a shortage and being able to deliver medicine to the patient directly. So I just believe that with the industry experience that's here and that's on this line, and our commitment to our mission. I mean, at the end of the day, we do something that really, really matters, right? We are developing medicines, and we're getting medicines to markets to support an enormous amount of different therapeutic areas for human health. And I just don't think that professionals like us are going to allow the lack of collaboration between even the areas where we think of ourselves as competitors, that we're going to ensure that we do everything possible to mitigate any of that happening.
Great. And Damien, your thoughts on the potential for shortages moving ahead and what factors contribute to that?
So there are clearly many, many factors that we're going to have to consider, but I probably pick on a few just to try to get a little bit specific. So I think distribution of stock is going to be a critical aspect here, and we've seen this in some countries which are more advanced in terms of the uptake of the virus, where we've even had distribution sitting, evenly spread across a country, but actually the crisis is happening in another part of the country. So distribution of stock is absolutely critical. And we have to absolutely avoid panic buying for people, buying packs of medicine that actually they're not going to use during the next month. It doesn't make an awful lot of sense. So we have, maybe if we take an example of a pharmacy sitting with 20 packs in it and another pharmacy, the next nearest pharmacy with only 1 pack in it, well, actually we'd want to see that and the difference in the stock that they've got. And you can make that same analogy precisely for the wholesalers situation as well. So we want to identify the pockets where there's overstock and pockets where there's less stock, and make sure that we get the stock in the right place. So that's a critical aspect of what we're going to do. And as the virus travels around the world, People are going to be at different places, so we have to make sure the stock is in the right place. The next thing is, and it's probably the biggest thing, is really the demand. The demand is extremely hard to predict, and that's because we're in a situation where doctors are actually trying different molecules. So we don't have anything to treat the virus directly, so they want to try different molecules in order to see can they make progress, and hence some of the clinical trials that we're seeing going forward. So we don't know at this point which medication is actually going to be the most needed medication. But we have analyzed our portfolio of products. We've identified corona-related molecules, things that could help with the virus, and also those molecules clearly that treat the symptoms. And we've moved production forward as far as possible in order to try to get as much of that stock into the market as is possible. So managing stocks in the right place is really important. And as an industry, we've got to take a perspective on this as well. We've got to find a way to actually share data and information. So, for example, competition law can get in the way of this being shared. And we've been working with governments and our legal advisors in order to try to share information anonymously so that, I don't like to get to see what's going on in the other companies. I just want to see what's going on at a global demand and supply level so that we can make sure that we are producing the medications that actually are required for the patients. So we have done this anonymously. We have focused on ICU medications in particular. And we've got a group of people across the industry working on medical forecasting models. And that's absolutely critical because you can imagine if we go back to our data from last year, it doesn't mean anything in this current situation. So we actually have to now develop the models that are going to help us to understand what we expect demand to be over the next months, but also maybe over the longer term as well. So that will give us the ability to see what will potentially happen with the virus, how it's going to evolve, and which medications may be frontline for actually treating the virus and its symptoms. So I think we need to do all of this, and we need to continue to deliver to patients. And I think we've got the plans in place to make that happen.
Great. And Chris, with your ground level view of what's happened in China, give us your take on the factors at play in possible future shortages.
So I think both Leon and Damien have addressed this issue very well. I think since we are focused on biologics supply chain is also a lot more complex. So hopefully most of us already have a good plan and have essentially, as I mentioned earlier, identified multiple vendors, has a very decent inventory, and our suppliers has a decent inventory at all. This way the overall situation is better. Overall, I think collaboration is also very critical at this stage because I think we may have occasional shortage of at different pockets, but if we collaborate as an industry, I think we should be able to address the potential shortage very well. I think so. In terms of biologic supply chain, and so since the process is complex, most companies has some decent inventory, and our vendor also has some inventory. And if the outbreak is contained in the next 2 to 3 months, and hopefully it doesn't really disrupt the supply chain, but if the COVID-19 pandemic persists and if it's lasts beyond 6 months, I think the whole supply chain for both small molecule and large molecule, entire pharmaceutical supply chain may be impacted. So the industry also need to be prepared for that and figure out what's our solution.
Great, thank you. And with a few minutes to go before we shift over to the question and answer period, gentlemen, I'd like to discuss lessons learned here moving ahead. Once the novel coronavirus pandemic eventually subsides, whatever that looks like, what lessons should the industry learn from this challenge, and what measures should be put in place to allow a faster and more effective response in the event of another challenge of this magnitude? Chris, your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think effective your BCP is, right? So I think that's still every company need to go back to review, saying all the lessons learned, through this crisis. How can you, what do you need to improve on your next version of BCP? So update your BCP to capture what's lessons learned, and and then redundancy. I think I don't know whether it's Damien or Leon mentioned redundancy of your supply chain, and for example, right now, a lot of our operations are based in China. So because of that, we are investing in Ireland. We're investing in Worcester, Massachusetts, to make sure really you have a redundancy and all the functions you have. During the crisis, we even think about uh, so every function you need to have an A/B team, and you need to have a dual site. And during the for the past couple of weeks, I also have some interaction with some of the pharma, large pharma. And you think about large pharma overall is very sophisticated, but occasionally you see one or two companies, the entire R&D engine, one critical function is located in one city. If let's say it's in Boston, in San Francisco, or it's in London, right? But globally, all the expertise residing in one city. So because of this outbreak, now you almost need to think about it. You need to almost have a dual site for everything, and you either do it yourself internally or you do it with a partner like Wuxi, right? So for antibody discovery, if all your antibody discovery is located in San Francisco, now if everyone need to work at home, how can you do your R&D at home, right? So you may need to put it in another city or another country, or work with a partner like Wuxi. I think review your business continuity plan and update it, and also ensure redundancy of your supply chain. Look at every step of your R&D, manufacturing, and a whole supply chain, and look at all the different aspects of the PCP. It's very critical.
Leon, your thoughts on that?
I'll say very similar to Chris. I mean, I definitely agree in the sense that I think being a CDMO, at least in the group that I work in here at Thermo Fisher, I think there'll be a lot more BCP questions coming up during our audits. Rightly so. I think what one of the lessons coming out of this is how robust is your supplier network. How robust is your own network, but how robust is your supplier network? I think our customers, us being one of them, because we have suppliers that support our own organization, as well as we are a supplier to the pharmaceutical industry. But I think all of us will be asking that question around who was able to contribute and support us in these very challenging times. And so I think that a lens into how robust is that supplier, and I think questions beyond, I believe, capability, scientific capability. I think you'll see more around. Look, I never heard so much talk about liquidity, right? In terms of how much our government, definitely here in the United States, is talking about sustaining businesses like the airlines, et cetera, that have no revenue, right? But we need them to stay afloat. I think there'll be more and more around what is the robust nature of an organization's infrastructure to support and be able to weather a situation such as this. Okay, so I think it'll be beyond just the technical capability. That's an important piece, but I think they'll be deeper than that when customers start to look at their supply chains once again. But I also think when you look at lessons learned, I am incredibly impressed with this, and I think Damien said it. I'm incredibly impressed with how much private-public partnership has evolved so quickly in this time of need, and I think that hopefully that will stay, because I do believe, especially when you think about antivirals, the economic dynamic of that therapy, it doesn't allow. And I heard this the other day, or a CEO from a small startup talking about it, which I thought was very interesting, which is about how do we incentivize more research in this space, right? You can't have a microscopic virus take 7 billion people in the world, and all of a sudden we're all sheltering in place. So how do we ensure that between now and whenever this will happen again, because this will, at some point, this happened in the past, it'll happen again. Bugs are bugs, they evolve. How do we ensure that we're evolving faster than they are? And I think without that public-private partnership, I don't know that we'll be ready. If this type of collaboration isn't sustained moving into the future, and that we ensure that we do our part from the private sector space, but that we also collaborate with the government to ensure that in certain areas, and not just government, but organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, some of these charitable organizations that do work on this. How do we ensure that this momentum stays? I also think, look, we're learning a lot about how quickly things can happen in our space. We tend to be a very conservative space in terms of getting drugs to market and being safe. Safety is very important in terms of the patients that we treat. But are the lessons that we're learning in terms of virtual audits, electronic submissions, virtual board meetings to get products approved? How do we use some of these lessons to say what can stay, still can create the safety and security that we need in our federal agencies to ensure that drug products are safe when they go to market? But can we learn some of the work that we're doing today to expedite more of this research into the future?
Great. And finally, Damien, if you could close us out, your thoughts on lessons learned.
So I think my colleagues did a great job of summarizing, the actual situation, and I would only reiterate that, business continuity planning, it's in place, and clearly we need to go back and do a post-mortem after all of this to see if there's anything that we can actually implement better. I think equally, I would say that I already mentioned an early warning system. This is something that we need to start to get in place, and probably everybody has now seen the clip of Bill Gates many years ago telling us that this was going to happen to us. And I think and I hope that this will be the last time that we have a virus of this aggressivity making its way across the planet before we actually have an early warning system to tell us either that it started, or even I think we might have the capability to say before it started, so that we can actually start to prepare. So I think there are things that need to be put into place for that warning system. I also think that so we talked about collaboration, and particularly between industry and government. Government plans need to be laid out. They need to be agreed in advance. And we need to, for example, deal with some of these issues where laws are stopping us from sharing simple things like demand and supply and capacity. We're not doing it for business gain. We're doing it to actually serve the patients. We need to be able to share that information, to have the capacity available at the right time to get the products to the patients. And in this case, as we've already discussed, the demand has changed dramatically. So there is no comparison between the demand of this year and last year. So we need to be able to do that rapidly and have a rapid response. So the industry needs to coordinate that capacity response also. It cannot just be one company that's going to do that. We all make different products, and in some cases we share some of those products. So we have to be able to get a response on the key products to focus in on. I'd focus also on the distribution of stock and making sure that we've got the ability to share that information. Why isn't it already visible across the world? Why don't we have that information? It's starting to happen in pockets, but we need to have it happening more and more. And then I think there are some, really interesting fundamental questions that we're going to start asking ourselves, but only once we've really emerged from this crisis. So are we striking truly the balance between supply security and quality and price? Have we really got that right? I think this has generated a huge amount of attention on API outsourcing, and that's a conversation that we're more than happy to have. We're delighted to start to open that up and discuss it. We do actually constantly evaluate our manufacturing and supply chain footprint. We do consider dual sourcing to ensure patients get medicines, but we actually need governments and stakeholders to partner with us and support us in that as well. And I just make one last point on that front. With very few exceptions, generic medicines prices go down year on year on year. So we have antibiotic tablets that in some cases cost less than a chewing gum. We've got antibiotic injectables, which in some cases cost less than a cappuccino. Once we get out of this crisis, once we've got the medication to our patients, and once we got back to normal, we really need to consider what we're going to do in the future.
Great. Thank you all. And that'll close our discussion period for this afternoon. Let's move directly into the Q&A session. There's still time to submit your questions using the Q&A tab to the left of your screen. We have lots of great questions already, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. The first question: there have been some legislation proposals to increase transparency and require companies to report more information about potential shortages, where they source their API, et cetera. What do the speakers think about those efforts? I'll open the question up to the floor.
Well, maybe I'll give it a go. Look, I think that if you think about some of the things that Damien was talking about, I don't think that where like API is sourced is going to change because we report it. Okay, there are economic factors that drive supply chains to respond a certain way. So I do think that it's more going back to what we were discussing earlier, which is there. How do we drive a different conversation, right, about the economic models that exist in certain therapeutic areas, in order to ensure that the right balance is struck, in order to secure a supply chain that delivers the right medicine at the right price to the right markets. But I just, when you think about, disclosing where manufacturing happens, which, I mean, a lot of the businesses that we do business with are public companies. So I would just say, is that really going to be a solution? The solution is really about thinking how around the development model, speed to market, the economic model that will incentivize organizations to deliver those medicines to the market. And I think let the supply chain structure be the one that drives the most efficiency. And I think we start to think more through flexibility, agility, and responsiveness in terms of how to create a supply chain. But a lot of the economic models that exist today was driven the supply chains that exist today. So if you want to shift that, you got to shift the economic models as well.
Damien or Chris, your thoughts?
So I'm happy to come in. I know I'm going to be a little bit behind you guys in the timing. So I think from my perspective, I'm not sure that the right discussion is to start to think about exactly where manufacturing is positioned. I think we need to focus on what we need to do to incentivize supply reliability. So what systems and processes do we need to have in place with governments and with health authorities in order to get us to the right place? And I think, this has to be a global response. So if we start to talk about reporting of information, well, actually, it depends how fast we see that information and where it's coming from and how global the information actually is as well. So if we have, for example, an API manufacturer based in Europe, and we actually don't get the visibility to see that they're manufacturing for a range of generic manufacturers and they've got an issue, we actually don't know what the impact is in the market. So we need to start to get transparency on that as well. It's not just a case of reporting that there are going to be stockouts or that there have been failures in the supply chain. I think as we move forward, we're going to be focusing in very much in sharing and collaboration. I'm saying many things start to happen within the industry already, not just because of this crisis. We've started to do it beforehand. What I do think is that we have to be very careful about how we deliver that information and how we pull it out of our supply chains, because there are masses of data points, absolutely masses. And I think in order to get something valuable out of the information, we need to have the ability to be able to analyze the information. So I think that's the first question. What are we able to analyze? And then we consider what information we should actually be collecting in order to get a result to help us to move it forward. So we've worked with governments. We have worked with agencies in order to consider what the processes on this should be. And we're working across the industry. It's not just one individual company doing that. And I think we need to get a company response, but we absolutely need to get an industry response and it has to be global in order for it to make sense.
Chris, any thoughts on that?
I think it's, Leon and Damien well said already. I think the current economic model drives the current supply chain, right? So go back to Damien's point, right? If you a generic injectable is cheaper than a cup of cappuccino, and so the whole economics need to change for us to really to help improve.
Great. Next question I have here. Has COVID-19 led you to consider more diversification in your supply chains, or do you believe the pharmaceutical sector is appropriately diversified to minimize disruption in supply chains? I'll leave that open to the floor as well.
Maybe I can start. Yeah, because as I mentioned earlier, biologic supply chains is extremely complex to begin with. So I think most of companies in our space has already taken that into account. So ideally, we have dual supply, and for each supplier, we also ask. So for example, I work with Thermo Fisher, so I will also ask our supplier to have a dual sites. So in a way, we already have a fairly sophisticated supply chain in place even before the COVID-19. I think the challenge that we're facing right now is, how do you, Leon and Damien mentioned before, how do you, because of the COVID-19, now the demand curve totally changed. So we are adjusting our supply curve to meet the demand curve. So as I'm making like new medicines to treat COVID-19, so I'm building the plane. I'm flying the plane as we're building it, right? So it's a lot. It take on all the previous learning you have, and you need to do it faster. So I think we're adequately we have an adequate supply chain to handle the pharmaceutical supply chain, and I think we can certainly continue to do better.
So from my point of view, I think that we already evaluate this on a very, very regular basis. We have to look at our manufacturing footprint. We have to look at dual sourcing and to make sure that we're able to continue to deliver medication to patients. That's our number one priority. So clearly, that's an aspect that we look at consistently and constantly, and we will continue to do that going forward. I think the reality is that this gets back to the discussion that we had, and it's not a discussion driven by the coronavirus, and it's not a discussion that we should probably have while we're dealing with the coronavirus, because we've got other more important things to do. But the question, I think, is, are we striking the right balance between supply security, quality, and price? We have to open up that discussion to the public, and we have to open up that discussion to the governments, and we need to get an answer between all of us as to where we feel the right point is to sit in between those three aspects. So I think we've started to do it. Industry collaboration is getting better. Government collaboration is getting better. I'm sure that we can do more to collaborate with our patients, and we've started to do some of that, for example, with interacting with patient groups. And I think many of those patient groups are actually behind us trying to move that point forward. But as I say, it's not the right thing to do today. It's not driven by the coronavirus. It is something that we need to take seriously as a point to deliver after we've actually got out of the crisis.
Just my thoughts, and I'm glad Chris mentioned that, because when you think about, we've been talking about collaboration, even on this panel, there's a collaboration because, well, Thermo Fisher Scientific in subsegments, we're both CDMOs, so we both serve as the same industry in this biologic manufacturing, so you can consider us competitors. But there's other parts of Thermo Fisher Scientific that are strategic key suppliers to companies like Chris's, in order to ensure that we support their manufacturing processes. I think that interconnectivity just exists across this entire supply chain. I would say, so thanks for that. I just want to be able to illustrate the fact that there is a collaboration. This type of collaboration is what's going to be needed into the future. I would say, look, COVID has tested that our business continuity planning and our supply chain strategies were robust enough to sustain something like this. So I don't think that when you have an issue like this, if you're waiting for an issue like this to happen to ensure that your supply chain is robust enough, it's too late. Okay, and I think those that did, those are going to be the ones that are not going to be able to weather the storm, and the customers and other parts of the supply chain are going to say that is not a partner, a supplier that we need. Okay, so COVID hasn't driven our thinking any necessarily differently. It's tested that all the years of business continuity planning has delivered a supply chain that is robust enough to sustain this. Now, I think Damon is right. Like, we will continue to improve it, because every time we go through something that enacts a business continuity plan, we build on top of what could we have done better. But that's a conversation after we're through the crisis. Not during the crisis. During the crisis, you're just trying to make sure that your BCP is delivering the output that you expected from it. And as the situation changes, right, because you got to be able to be nimble enough that as the environment changes, your BCP has to have that flexibility that you can adjust as conditions on the ground change in order to continue to deliver medicines to patients.
Great. And gentlemen, with only a few minutes left, we have one more question, maybe with brief responses here. Are there any plans in place to further incorporate demand forecasting for scenarios such as this pandemic in the future?
Well,
First slot
I'll tell you, I'll just go really quick. Go ahead, Damon.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay in the line. So we've already started to do this, and we recognized very, very quickly that we needed to get a handle on it. We needed to get a better understanding of what the demand signal was going to be, and we needed to do it extremely quickly. I think we've got all of the right players now taking part in this, from clinical academics right through to people in the supply chain. We've got a broad range of skills that are coming together to be able to help us to pull the forecast together. It's an extremely complex thing to do. So I'll just give you an example. There are frontline medicines that are going to be used for patients who are going onto mechanical ventilation. There are probably 4 different categories, but even within each of those categories, different countries and health systems actually have preferences for different products. So that shifts quite a lot, and actually it's very, very difficult to say which exact product they're going to actually need in the front line. So we've got everybody together. We have built the models. They are extremely complex, and I think this is a really great opportunity to actually try them out, because I hope that we've developed something that was absolutely needed during the crisis across the industry that can actually be used for the future.
Just really quick from my end, we have a set of individuals within our organization that do demand planning for the clinical. So I'll give you the clinical supply chain perspective of it, because one of the things that we've done over the years in order to take cost out of the development supply chain is to try to remove waste from that supply chain, because demand is uncertain. Where the patients are going to be recruited, how many patients per site. So I think what we're going to continue to do, we don't want to swing the pendulum too far of overproduction, right? Because then all that work that we've done over the years to lean out the supply chain and reduce costs is going to go to waste. I don't think we need to do that. I think when we think about planning for such a contingency, it's more about the different vehicles to ensure that the delivery to a patient can be done at the time where that demand trigger is closest to that patient. I think today we do a lot of forward planning. We seed sites, so we there is waste within the supply chain itself. How close can we get to positioning the supplies closest to the patient, but without necessarily committing them to a particular site, so they stay nimble and flexible, so we can be more responsive when something like this happens again.
And Chris, with about a minute left, if you have a brief response.
No, I think it's well said already.
Great. So that is our last question for the session. We had a lot of great questions today and couldn't get to them all, unfortunately, but we'll try our best to get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. Thank you for attending this virtual roundtable and submitting so many great questions. I'd like to thank our speakers for participating. The session has been recorded. You'll be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.